Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin, and today we have Dan Corley joining us. And Dan, before we dive into the story, about your story, a few sports questions. So first one, favorite all-time sports team?
See, that's a tough one. So I'm going to break right now and say two: the '96 Bulls and '91 Duke.
I like it. Two teams, NBA and college.
Yeah.
How about your favorite all-time player?
Charles Barkley.
Charles Barkley. You're physical like him, the way, I like it.
Yeah, I love Barkley, man.
And last one highlight from, you can think of like high school or college that really stood out in playing hoops.
Burnsville High School. We're playing Burnsville High School. Our senior year, my team is not very good, and we were down one. I caught the ball at the free throw line, traveled on the way to the basket, fully admit it, but four Burnsville guys jumped up to block it, and I dunked it on all four, and we happened to get that picture. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, took the Polaroid or whatever we used back in the 90s and snapped the picture of me dunking on all four of them. That was pretty cool.
And you took a couple extra steps?
Oh, yeah, I traveled, yeah. All my Burnsville buddies are like, you traveled. I'm like, oh, I know I did, but we still won the game. So
it must have been like an NBA game, because you could take about 3, 4, maybe 5 steps.
Maybe 5 steps. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Appreciate that. Hey, let's get into your story. So share with the listeners about growing up. You grew up in Canada, and then eventually your move to Rosemount, Minnesota, and just some of the kind of highlights and challenges along the way.
So I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, born in '76. So grew up playing hockey my entire life. And by the time I got to 6th, 7th grade, I started playing all the other sports like volleyball, basketball, things like that. The funny thing is I was horrible at basketball. So I had a team. So in 6th grade, if you have a future of maybe working in the government someday, you get put in a French school. So I got moved to a French school, and there's like 100 kids in the entire school. And so you got to figure 50 guys and the nerdier guys. And I got cut from the 7th grade basketball team, which is just wild. But then 8th grade came around. I made the team, but didn't play that much. But I fell in love with the sport. And my uncle came over and put a basketball hoop in our front yard in our driveway, which was pretty cool. And I played all summer long. And then 9th grade, I just completely fell in love with the sport. But I was still playing hockey. I was still playing all the other sports and everything else. So then we move my summer of 9th grade, so going into 10th grade. So I go from this little French-Canadian school where I spoke French all day long and planted in Rosemount High School. 2,400 kids, a full campus, football stadium, like I couldn't even understand what was going on, because my school was one of those typical built in the 50s, brick buildings, small windows. Like that was just the school we went to. And that was how all the schools were in Winnipeg. It just wasn't about big, giant campuses. And to be dropped at Rosemount High School was just, it was overwhelming. It was completely overwhelming to me.
So share with the listeners more about that story, coming to Rosemount, that first experience, because I was there. I was a young coach at Rosemount, I believe, when you were maybe a senior in high school. And share with the listeners your kind of first experience of playing basketball in the States, in the United States. And I remember it was like your father and you meeting with the head coach as well, Coach Bender.
Well, what's funny is, so we moved on the border of Apple Valley, Rosemount, so I could have went to either one. We went to Apple Valley High School first to meet with the coach. And he told me that I couldn't play hockey and basketball in the same season. And I didn't understand it. Because in Canada, you do your sports after school and then everybody plays hockey. So how can I not play hockey and basketball in the same season? I've been playing hockey since I was 3 years old. At the time, I was like 6'4", maybe 150 pounds. So Mario Lemieux was my idol. And like, how can I not play hockey? So I got super frustrated. My dad got frustrated and we left there. And so we called up Steve Bender at Rosemount. We went and met with Steve Bender. And Bender actually took the time to sit down and explain what varsity sports were in the United States. And is like, oh, I didn't even understand it. So I decided I was going to play basketball and I wanted to play for Bender. The funny thing is I walk in as a 10th grader, and I think you were there at that time. I had never in my life seen a leather basketball. I had never seen a 3-point line. I had never seen a glass backboard. And so I'm walking in this environment where all these kids came up playing traveling, doing all this kind of stuff. And I thought I was like a pretty good player in Canada. And I realized I knew nothing about the sport, nothing. So that first year, I remember one of the coaches telling me that, I'm not sure why you're even playing. You're never going to make varsity. And I was the 12th guy on the sophomore team. And my confidence level was at an all-time low. I was always an athletic guy, but just even my accents, right? Because I said about and and a after everything I said, and it was just such a challenge, even being in the environment, just feeling like a just complete outsider.
And I know you understood English because I'm sure you spoke French and English where you came from. So that wasn't really. Did you find yourself speaking French at time at school or around home? Or I'm just curious about that.
No, it was more or less when you go to school, but you've been learning, like, let's say biology. I remember I was sitting in a biology class.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I'd learned in biology was all in French. So now you're in a biology class in the States, and they're using terminology or chemistry that you're just not familiar with because you know the French word, but you don't know the English word. So it's hard to translate all that stuff when I wasn't really good at French anyway. It's just not one of my things to speak a second language. But the words I knew were French words, not English words.
Okay.
So it was just a challenge. So school and everything was just a super challenge back then.
Hey, same here. It's like the second language is challenging. I have a hard time with just the English language. Share with the listeners about what some of the coaches had mentioned to you and about developing like toughness for the game and what transpired after that.
I think what happened was I was in junior varsity in 11th grade, and I'd always prided myself on when I was up in Canada, I was just a really good athlete. But I was in a small school, and it never occurred to me that like to work hard. Like it just didn't really occur to me because I was just naturally more athletic than all the other kids. And so sports came relatively easy to me. And so here I am now in this big environment and I'm just struggling with sports. And I was too scared to play football, too scared to play basketball because I was too intimidated, or football because I was too intimidated. So basketball is the only thing I'm playing. So I'm averaging like 4 points a game on JV the first half of the season. It was just ridiculous. And I'm goofing around in practice and we're supposed to be like working hard and I'm screwing around. And Paul Gates, who was our JV coach at the time, he basically just lays into me, just lights me up about my work ethic and how I have so much potential, but I just don't work hard. And it like shocked me to my core. Like I had never really been called out like that. I was always the captain. What are we doing here? And I just remember being so mad and so frustrated. And so we move on to the next drill that we're doing. And it was supposed to be like a take the charge kind of drill, nice and easy, more technique drill. And I remember I got the ball and I just drove so hard and I just jumped up and just dunked on this guy. And I remember I hit him in the face and I might have even broken his nose. And Steve Bender looks at me, he's, if you just played that hard all the time, you have no idea how good you can be. It was like, wow. So the next game, I just decided every time I get the ball, I'm going to try and dunk it every time I touch it. And I scored 36 in that JV game. And it was like, for the first time, I remember checking out like in the first half and I was winded. Like I was physically winded. And I'm like, wow, this is how you do it. Like, this is how you do it. It never even occurred to me to work this hard before. And then I think you were still there at that time. And then shortly after that, I got moved to varsity and then I was named captain my senior year.
Yeah, and then now it's your plans after high school. I think you attended, share with the listeners about you attended UND and then why you wanted to go to UND. And then I believe you go to Normandale for maybe 1 year and then eventually the Mankato State. Just share with us some of maybe the successes and challenges along the way, but just your intention all along to go to the University of North Dakota?
This is just the arrogance that I look back. It was just hilarious. So all of a sudden I'm averaging like 20 and 12 my senior year. So I start getting looks at Hamlin and all these MIAC schools were talking to me. But I grew up in Winnipeg. And the only college I really knew was the University of North Dakota because there was a TV station out of Grand Forks called WDAZ. And I watched all the Fighting Sioux hockey games. And I thought, how awesome. And my Bender's so funny. He's just, that's D2. I'm like, yeah, and? I literally didn't understand D1, D2, D3. Like, I didn't understand any of that stuff. And I never took the time to understand it. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to go play there. And he's, no, they like, you're not good enough. So anyway, we go back and forth. So then the Burnsville game I brought up earlier, that dunk I had, I'm walking off the court and Bender goes to me, he goes, do you still want to go to UND? And I said, yeah, like we're literally walking off the court. So I get home and for all the young listeners, there used to be this thing called an answering machine. And so my red light's blinking on my answering machine and I press play and it's the head coach of UND. So it's 11 o'clock at night. I call him back and he's just, I just got a call from Steve Bender. And he says that you're one of the most raw players he's ever had, but you're really athletic and you work incredibly hard. And we have one scholarship left. Do you want to come play for us? That was it. There was no recruiting. There was no like all the stuff. Like it was a complete God thing. And so I went up there. So I played at UND my first year. And funny thing is, I got what I deserved. I hated it. I just hated it. I hated the environment. I didn't like being that far away from home. And part of the problem is I was heading down my Christian journey. Like I was really trying. I was part of FCA. I was trying to be a leader. But all my Canadian buddies, because I'm only 2 hours away from Winnipeg, wanted to come down and they wanted to party. They wanted to drink. They wanted to do all the college stuff. And I just let it get to me. And so by my second semester, I was academically ineligible from partying so much, and I had to make a choice.
And then that choice should be, I believe you went to Normandale for 1 year, right? Or
So a friend of mine went to Mankato State. So I called up the coach. I drove down there. I went and visited with the coach, and he's like, "We'd love to have you. I don't know what kind of scholarship money we have this year, but maybe next year. But you got to sit out a year." And I said, "My girlfriend goes to Normandale. Can I go play junior college basketball for a year and then come play for you and still be eligible?" And he's like, "Yeah, that would probably work out pretty well." So then I went to Normandale for a year, played college for the Lions, which was the last year they had basketball. And then I went down to Mankato. And I was fortunate enough, there was 4 or 5 walk-ons. And the deal was if you made the team, I'd get a scholarship. So I paid for part of my first semester and I was able to make the team. And then there was some team turmoil. And then I was able to get a scholarship after that. So it worked out pretty well. So I played my last 3 years down at Mankato.
oh, so you had an opportunity to play 3 years.
Yeah. So I did 5. So red shirt at UND, freshman year at Normandale, and then last 3 years in Mankato.
Awesome. Wow. And then after Mankato State, share with the listeners about your decision, I know, to get married to Heather.
Yep.
And then not to just share with that about possibly playing some pro ball overseas.
What was funny is, so I dated my girlfriend for 6 years. And so I'm visiting my grandmother up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And she asked me how long we've been dating. And I told her, and she was about 88 at the time. And she goes, "Son, you better pee or get off the pot." I'm like, yeah, I get it. So at the same time, I want to continue my basketball career. There's some opportunities overseas in Ireland and Turkey to go play. But my wife, my girlfriend, fiance at the time, refused to go with me if we weren't married. And it was one of those deals where you graduate in May, season's over in March, but in order to make the tryouts and everything, you have to leave in April. So I'd have to miss my last little bit of school. We weren't getting married until August of that year. And I just decided, you know what, she's more important to me than all this. And I was naive enough to think that I could wait a year and then go once we were married, which obviously once you pass your window, there's a whole new crop of seniors coming up. Mm-hmm. And that window's passed. I didn't understand at the time, but so decided to give all that up, graduate, get a real-time job, a big boy job, and we got married in August.
I was going to just go back to that.
Yep.
Did anybody coach you up on going to play overseas, like your Mankato coach or any coaches there, or anybody advise you along the way?
No, and this was my issue as well. I didn't seek out wise counsel. I just got the tidbits, got the information, and made a decision on my own. Looking back, what would it have cost me to spend an hour and talk to some other folks, talk to our coaches, sit down and weigh out the opportunities? I just never did it. I just made a decision, moved on. The environment that I grew up in was not one that you sought counsel. You looked for wisdom from older people, looked for wisdom in people that had been there before. And to be honest with you, I didn't even understand that's what I should be doing.
That's a great lesson for any listeners, but especially younger listeners. Seek wise counsel. Seek it out. It's going to help you along the way. And
absolutely.
Share with the listeners now after college, and now you're working, have a child. Eventually, I think at age 25, you start many businesses, I believe, going forward. And just to share with the listeners about some of the highlights and maybe some of the challenges along the way during this time.
We were going to wait 5 years before we had kids, and then we had a child 14 months later after marriage. And then God was just so good. So we got married, my wife got pregnant, and she got incredibly sick. So we had bought a house, we bought a couple of vehicles, we both were earning an income, and all of a sudden her income's gone. And so now I got decisions to make, like I'm a young kid, and now I can't even afford my mortgage, right? My wife's pregnant and I can't afford the mortgage. I started working nights at a video store. I worked the weekends with a landscaping company, and I started this little company called Database Guy, where I would go and help people out with their computers. And just the most amazing thing happened. Like, there was one day where I was driving down 62, and I just working all these hours. My wife's sick at home, all this kind of stuff. I just broke down, cried right on the side of 62, and I got to work. I had got an email from a headhunter, and it happened to be for an investment bank, which doubled my salary. Took the job. They paid for all my health insurance, paid for the delivery of my first child, all that kind of stuff. It was great. But the hours were incredibly long. So I was working downtown, had one child at the time, and driving home, I started renting books at the library, and I rented a book on like building your own house. And so I decided to build my own house out in Northfield. So we bought 7 acres of land. I didn't even know how to swing a hammer. I hired an old general contractor, and we built the house out in Northfield. And through that process, I got to meet a bunch of people in the mortgage and real estate industry, stuff like that. So I decided 3 years into my professional career to quit my job. I had 3 kids at the time and start my own company. And I started a mortgage company. Again, going back to the Paul Gates thing, it was like I figured if I just worked super hard, I could make it all work. And it would just be, I just happened to be blessed at the right time, 2002, 2003, when mortgage rates were dropping. So the refinance boom was happening. And so we started a mortgage company that led to a real estate company that led to a development company where we bought land and developed the land. And then if you're going to develop the land, you might as well build the houses. So then we started a construction company, and then we bought into a title company. And so we had all of our businesses were tied to real estate. And it was just a phenomenal 5-6 years. Money was good. Kids were great. A young family. It was just an awesome time.
Yeah, I remember that too, Dan, how well you were doing, and the many businesses you started, but I believe you had a number of offices too around the Twin Cities. Is that correct?
Yep, we had offices. I think at one point we had 40 or 50 people that worked for us. The remote thing wasn't really a thing at the time, so you had to rent all this commercial space, and a lot of our development was happening in southern Minnesota. So we had offices all over the place. So it was a really fun time. But for me, it was, I didn't really understand, because I'd never been through a business cycle before. I didn't know that everything wasn't always up and to the right from a sales perspective. I didn't understand business cycles. And going back to what we talked about before, the counsel I was getting wasn't very good. And now that I look back on it, because it was always like we took the profit from this and rolled it into that, took the profit and never took profit for ourselves, like never put away for the rainy day, because things were always like, if you make $1,000 here and you invest it in this, 2 months later, you got $2,000. And then you just keep rolling. I really wish I just could have sought wise counsel back then and just took a step back and understood business cycles, that it's not always up and to the right.
That leads us to the impact that the recession had on your businesses and just some of the challenges going forward. I know a challenge with one of your sons, with, I believe, a rare liver disease. And then just share with the listeners just, the challenges along the way, but also how you overcame all those challenges.
So 2008, we decided as a company that as long as we did 5 deals a month, that could be a real estate deal, a mortgage deal, whatever, we could survive. And we were doing like 30 to 50 deals a month. So if we get 90% of our business is gone, we could still survive. We did one deal the first 6 months of 2008. There's no deals to be had, and banks are shutting down all over the country. And it was just a really hard time. So we made the decision that we were going to file bankruptcy. And what does that look like? We had personally guaranteed lease spaces. We had 200 some lots we had guaranteed. So we were going to file bankruptcy. So we go through that whole process. 2009, we file our bankruptcy, and we're like, okay, we're going to restart now. I have an IT background, so we're going to start an IT company, and I'm going to do some consulting work. Right when that happens, it's a story of, it's a June day, and I noticed my son, my 6-year-old son playing baseball, is actually taking a nap on third base while he's playing baseball. And I have twin boys, they were 6 at the time. And we realized he's yellow. And so anyway, a series of a couple of weeks go by trying to figure out what's going on, and come to find out my son has a rare liver disease, and his liver is failing him. And so we go to the hospital, we don't come back out middle of June, and August 4th, he ends up having a liver transplant. Now, just from a dad perspective, it's just horrible to watch your kids go through this. He was at the top of the transplant list. There's 2 or 3 times where the doctor says he might not make it this weekend. We also had it was a match biologically, but not anatomically. So that there's a vein that goes through your liver, and mine splits and his doesn't. And so I was going to be his donor. The problem with that was they weren't sure that I would make it because of the way the surgery had to go. So we had to get 2 beds right next to each other. And I don't remember the percentage, I'd say 20% chance that like I might not even make it through this. So here I am going to give up my liver, and then not knowing if I'm going to come out to be able to support my family right after we just went through this bankruptcy. So we don't have anything. We went from a big house in the country to 800 square foot Rambler in Rosemount. That was an incredibly challenging time. And by God's grace, the night before I'm supposed to go in, we got a call at 11 o'clock that a man had a heart attack in Minneapolis and was a perfect match. And so they went, and he was an organ donor. Praise God, he was an organ donor. And then that next day, my son got a transplant from this donor. So I didn't have to go in. But that led to all of our other kids getting tested for this genetic disease, and his twin brother was an exact match. So his twin brother has this same disease. And with that was even more challenging, not more challenging, but it was also had challenges because the disease itself is your body doesn't process copper. So there's a metal toxicity goes through your body. My son had all this copper started destroying the rods and cones in the back of his eyes. So besides the liver disease that he had, we were told that he'd be blind by the time he was 18. And so we're going through all of this with a startup company that's not really making any money. And it was just an incredibly challenging time.
So how about on the insurance end? That had to be pretty challenging on the insurance end too, just be able to cover that.
If a bankruptcy clears out your debts, right? But you don't have any credit, right? You can't buy a car, you can't do anything like that. And so I didn't really have insurance. And my son was also autistic. And back then, before the Affordable Care Act came in, you had to have separate insurance for autistic kids. Basically had to have special insurance because if they're on your insurance, then your insurance would skyrocket. So you had to go get their own insurance for kids with pre-existing conditions. That's the way it worked. I think at the end of the day, by the time everything was done with the doctors and all that kind of stuff, we owed about $250,000 in medical debt that wasn't covered. Because not only is it the surgery for my son, but we had 3 years of him rejecting. So we had to constantly go back in, and then we had to have home nurses, and then he had to get steroids, but then he got steroids-induced diabetes. And it was just this nonstop cycle till 2012 of in and out of the hospitals. Yeah, we owed about $250,000 of debt that I could not pay.
And so now for the next so many years, I think you go back to work, right? And then you kind of start kind of paying this off. And
so I took a job at Mystic Lake Casino just because I needed the insurance to cover some of the rejection medicines. And then my son's also going through this thing. We need chelation medicine for my other son. And we have this eye issue going on and all this kind of stuff. And so I was at Mystic Lake for a while. And at one point, I just remember just crying because I didn't want to be there. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And this crazy thing happened where my son was in the hospital again. This is 2011-ish. And I was there till 10:30 at night, and I drove out of the parking ramp, and I didn't have $6 to get out of the ramp. And I just remember just being like, what is going on? And so I called my dad. He drove over to St. Paul and he put his card in the machine, and I was able to get out. And I came back to the hospital the next day, and I just told my wife, I'm like, I can't do this. God's calling me for something different. I can't do this. Nothing we're doing is working. We've been broke for years. Our son's in the hospital, like nothing's doing. I feel like I have to go back out on my own. And so in any typical wife fashion, she says, just don't screw it up. And so a week later, I went in and quit my job. And I reopened. My company's already open, but I just re-engaged my IT company and went on from there.
And is that still in place too, that IT
Yep.
company?
Yeah. And what we did is we sat down, and so it's like this conversation with my wife, right? We're in the hospital and our son is in the hospital. Yep. But we don't have any money. Yep. But I think I need to quit my job. And so we agreed that if we're going to do this, we're going to tithe on the gross of the company. We're going to put God first in all that we do. And we're just going to trust that God will come through for us. And so that's what we did. I started making phone calls. I found a contract to work for an IT company for a small little contract. So I knew I had money coming in for the next 90 days and quit my job. And then that's what we did. We started tithing on the gross. Every time a check for 5,000 came in, 500 went right out the door a second later. That's just the way we operated. And that was in December, and God blessed it so abundantly. By April, we were able to buy a house where we hadn't owned a house in years. And opportunities just kept coming in, and opportunities kept coming in. And it was just, Roger, I can't explain to you when you have earlier, when I was having blessings with the mortgage stuff and the real estate stuff, I didn't have the character to handle the blessing. I didn't understand it. But then you go through these valleys of just despair and all that kind of stuff. So then when the blessing comes back, the appreciation you have for it is incredible. I can't describe it. You're so appreciative of everything because you've had nothing for so long. So yeah, the IT company, I still run it today, and God has continued to bless it over and over for the last 15 years, 16 years now.
And then also with that too, moving forward, tell the listeners about, I know, some obstacles, challenges, or successes along the way in building the Hope Fieldhouse, and just kind of inspiration behind that.
Yeah, and so I wanted to be super involved. As Roger knows, sports is my thing. So when we moved to Rosemount, I decided I would join the Rosemount Athletic Board, even though my kids weren't like in the traveling age yet. They maybe were like in first grade, second grade, something like that. And we were having gym shortage challenges. We were having challenges with people finding court space, kids finding court space. So Rosemount at the time made a decision that we should just maybe cut kids out of our youth programs who were like C team or below, like the C teamers. I grew up playing sports, like sports where all my friends came from, sports where like my life lessons came from. We can't do that. And so God just put this like overwhelming burden on my heart to do something about it. And I don't know what that is. So going back to the story of the blessing and buying the house, that was 2012. This is July of 2013. So I had this little window of 14, 15 months where things were going good. And all of a sudden now I have this overwhelming desire to do something in Rosemount, to build something. So we went through, it was 5 years of discovery. Rosemount put something up for a referendum that it failed. My wife and I put a bunch of money down on land that we believed that God was calling us to, that didn't come to fruition. And then in 2018, and we were doing a private, everything was private. And I thought, this is going to be my legacy. I'm going to pass this down to my kids. And then in 2018, God just slapped me in the face and was just like, why are you doing this in the first place? And it was like for kids, for special needs kids, for the community. And so then at that moment, we decided to make it a nonprofit where my wife and I didn't take anything from it. We just gave to it. And 18 months later, I say 18 months, but everybody knows 18 months is a long time. We had to raise $2 million to open it. It was a $6 million building. Yeah, that was some hard times, but also really fruitful as well. So then we opened the field house. We broke ground in 2020. I'm sorry, Roger, if I'm going off here, but we broke ground in January of 2020. And we had so much excitement, so much enthusiasm, so much everything else. But then COVID hit, and it was just that was really challenging as well.
And here it is, thriving in 2025.
Yeah, but I gotta say, it's crazy how God works, Roger. So God gives me this, we're going to build a field house, right? We're going to spend the next 7 years and all of our resources that we just gained back, and we're going to build a field house. And at the same time, God gives my wife the desire to adopt internationally. So then at that same time, while I'm trying to build a field house, we end up adopting 3 girls from Costa Rica. So it was this wild journey of adoption and building this field house that kind of all came together in 2018, 2019.
God has you and your wife and your family on a journey.
It's
pretty
wild.
amazing. And like
It's
you're
wild.
talking about, we have our ups and downs, but a lot of lessons learned. And wrapping this up today, real quick in about 30 seconds, if you want just a shout out to some people that really have impacted you along the way.
So my best friend, Peter Ide, had just passed away in April after a battle with colon cancer. And I would say from just an impact in my life, he is one of the most impactful people I've ever met. And I coached him for 12 years, and he talked about a couple of different things, rhythm and relationships, that life is just rhythm and relationships. And it's developing those relationships along the way and not being too tied to work, but spending time developing relationships, developing connections, seeking wisdom, wise counsel, all of those things. So I would say Peter has been just an incredibly influential person in my life. And I would say my wife has just been an unbelievable source of wisdom. And just, I didn't grow up with a faith background where she did. And so things to this day, I'm almost 50, that are uncomfortable for me are normal for her. And she's just taught me a different way to look at life, a better way to look at life. So I would say those are probably the 2 most influential people in my life.
What are some final thoughts that you want to leave with men as they continue on their journey?
I would say the mistakes I've made in the past, if I were to go back and talk to my 25-year-old self, I would say take time to seek wise counsel and take time to seek God. And those are important things. And when you are an entrepreneurial or you're a high energy person and you feel like you need to go, you have to understand that one of the best benefits you possibly could do is just to slow down, seek counsel before you make decisions, seek God before you make decisions, and don't move ahead unless you have confirmation that's what you're supposed to be doing.
All right, that's a wrap with Dan Corley. I want to thank you for being a part of the Men Pursuing More podcast. And where can our listeners follow you and your story?
So I'm not huge on social media, but I'm on X, Dan_Corley. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, or Facebook if you wanted to.
Amen, brother. Hey, appreciate it. Appreciate your time. All right.
Thanks, Roger. Have a good.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at mopandcoaching.com.